The ceramic plate shattered against the marble floor. Music, and immediately, Moon Hunul knew the game was up. "You're fired," he barked, a cold, dismissive command she recognized from a lifetime of dealing with men who thought they were gods. A command that meant only one thing. Her cover was blown. But here's the thing. Baek Do-kyung had no idea who he was actually throwing out. He saw a clumsy maid, a girl from the streets who couldn't keep her eyes down, an easy target to be discarded. He didn't know that Hanul was the deadliest ghost in the Special Forces archives. He didn't know that she had survived 3 years in a high-security prison for a crime she didn't commit. He didn't know that Hanul, music, could map the tactical weaknesses of a penthouse the way most women map a grocery store. And he definitely didn't know that his little firing would leave him defenseless against the army of assassins currently cutting through his security. Many thought were loyal. Soldiers who had already turned. A pattern of betrayal hidden behind expensive silk robes and neck tattoos. What happens when a predator discards his only shield? Stay until the end, because this story has a power reversal you will never see coming. This is the story of a mafia boss who fired his maid for eavesdropping, and the elite soldier who came back that same night to save his life when the men sent to end it. The envelope of cash hit the floor with a soft thud as Baek Do-kyung looked down at Hanul. "I don't pay for curiosity, dear. Pack your things." The words floated across the sterile, ultra-modern office like a blade wrapped in velvet. Outside, the Seoul skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling glass, cold and indifferent. Blue neon light cast long, sharp shadows across the penthouse's minimalist living room. The scent of expensive scotch mingled with the ozone of a high-tech security system. Somewhere in the building's basement, a silent alarm was being bypassed. A digital clock on the wall flickered to 11 p.m. Moon Hanul pressed her hand against her pockets, feeling the weight of the silver cleaning rag she used to hide her tactical gear. She was exhausted from 6 months of playing the invisible ghost, scrubbing the bloodstains of a man who didn't even know her real name. She wanted nothing more than to be back in her quiet studio apartment, watching the rain and forgetting the weight of a rifle. But Do-kyung had caught her. His eyes had found hers through the reflection of the glass while he discussed the Black Tiger shipment. Out. Now. So, here she was, clutching a cardboard box of cleaning supplies that made her look like a helpless victim, standing in a room that cost more than the hospital bill for her dying father, surrounded by Do-kyung's elite guards and their bulging jackets, their arrogant smirks, and their fatal overconfidence. "Thank you, Chairman Baek," Hanul said, keeping her voice soft and trembling. "I'll be gone in 10 minutes. His smirk didn't reach his eyes. It never did. In the 6 months since Hanul had started working for the syndicate boss, Do-kyung had perfected the art of a cruelty that was perfectly manicured. Every order was a test. Every paycheck was a leash. Every glance was a reminder that, to him, she was just part of the furniture. He didn't realize that while he was busy being a king, the furniture had been busy learning how to kill him. The elevator ride down from the penthouse was silent and cold. Hanul stood perfectly still, clutching her small cardboard box of cleaning supplies. To the security camera in the corner of the ceiling, she looked like a defeated girl who had just lost her only source of income. Her shoulders were slumped, and her head was bowed. But behind her dark hair, her eyes were wide and alert. She wasn't thinking about her lost paycheck. She was counting the floors as they ticked by on the digital display. She knew how Baek Do-kyung worked. He didn't just fire people who knew too much. He erased them. He lived in a world where secrets were more dangerous than bullets, and a maid who had spent 6 months in his private office was a loose thread that needed to be cut. When the doors slid open in the dim, concrete basement of the parking garage, the air smelled of damp stone and expensive car exhaust. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, shaky shadows across the rows of black luxury cars. Hanul stepped out onto the oil-stained floor, her sensible shoes clicking softly. She didn't head for the exit. Instead, she walked toward the shadowed corner where the staff bicycles were kept. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He was one of Do-kyung's cleaners, a man whose only job was to make sure people disappeared without a trace. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply reached into his jacket, his hand moving toward the silenced pistol tucked into his belt. He moved with the confidence of a man who thought he was dealing with a helpless victim. Hanul didn't scream. She didn't even drop her box. In one fluid motion, she stepped into the man's space before he could even clear his holster. She dropped the box an inch, caught it with her left forearm, and used her right hand to drive the edge of a heavy metal spray bottle into the soft part of the man's throat. As he gasped for air, his eyes bulging in shock, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it until the bone popped like a dry twig. Before he could hit the floor, she spun behind him, wrapped a sturdy cleaning rag around his neck, and applied pressure to the artery. 3 seconds. That was all it took. The man went limp, his gun still halfway in his pocket. Hanul caught him as he fell, lowering him silently to the ground so his head didn't even make a sound against the concrete. She stood up and adjusted her white apron, which was still perfectly straight and clean. She didn't look back at the man. She simply picked up her box, straightened a bottle of window cleaner that had shifted, and continued walking toward the bicycle rack. She had spent years learning how to be a ghost, and a ghost did not leave a mess. As she unlocked her old, rusted bicycle, she looked up at the ceiling. Somewhere far above, in the glittering penthouse, Du-kyung was probably pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch, thinking he was finally safe from her prying ears. He had no idea that his best assassin was currently taking a nap on the basement floor. Hanul pedaled out of the garage and into the cool night air of Seoul. The city was glowing with neon lights, but the darkness was spreading. She could feel in the wind. The Black Tiger gang would be at the penthouse soon. Du-kyung had fired his only shield, and the hunters were already at the gate. High above the city, the air in the penthouse felt still and heavy. Baek Du-kyung sat at his wide desk, staring at the glittering lights of Seoul through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He swirled a glass of dark liquid, feeling satisfied. He had just fired the only person who made him feel uneasy. With the maid gone, he believed his secrets were once again locked behind thick walls of steel and glass. He felt like a king who had finally cleared a pesky insect from his throne room. He didn't notice that the silent alarm on his computer had been deactivated. He didn't see the tiny green light on his security panel turn a deep, warning red. Down in the lobby, the elite guards were leaning against the marble counters. They were wearing expensive suits and carried the latest weapons, but they were bored. They thought they were untouchable because they worked for the most feared man in the country. They didn't see the black van pull up to the service entrance. They didn't hear the soft click of the side door opening. The betrayal started with a simple nod. The head of security, a man Du-kyung had trusted for 5 years, looked at his watch and stepped into the stairwell. He pulled a small device from his pocket and jammed the elevator controls. With a single press of a button, he turned off the electronic locks on the back doors. He wasn't a loyal soldier anymore. He had been bought by the Black Tiger gang for a price Du-kyung would never pay. The Black Tiger assassins moved like smoke. They didn't wear bright colors or shout. They wore tactical gear that absorbed the light, and their faces were hidden behind dark masks. Because the security codes had been handed to them, they didn't have to break any windows. They simply walked in. In the main hallway, the first team of Du-kyung's guards didn't even have time to reach for their holsters. They were met with silenced shots that sounded like nothing more than a cough. They fell to the plush carpet without a word. The elite force that Du-kyung paid millions to maintain was being erased in seconds. The men he trusted to die for him were being caught in their own blind spots. The same blind spots Hanul had once secretly fixed, but that were now wide open again. Du-kyung was halfway through his glass of scotch when he heard a faint thud from the outer office. It was the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor. He frowned and set his glass down. He checked the monitors on his desk, but the screens were flickering with static. "June," he called out, naming his personal bodyguard. "Is everything okay out there?" There was no answer. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the distant honking of cars far below. A cold shiver ran down Du-kyung's spine. For the first time in years, he felt the sharp bite of fear. He reached into his desk drawer for his gold-plated pistol, but his hand was shaking. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors to his office were kicked open. A flashbang grenade rolled across the hardwood floor, exploding in a blinding white light. Du Kyung stumbled back, covering his eyes as the room filled with thick, gray smoke. He tried to fire his weapon, but a heavy boot slammed into his wrist, sending the gun skittering across the room. Through the haze, he saw the dark shapes of the Black Tiger hitmen. They stood in a circle around him, their rifles pointed at his chest. Behind them stood his head of security, a cruel smile on his face. "The chairman sends his regards," the traitor said, his voice cold and flat. Du Kyung fell back into his leather chair, his heart racing. He looked around his beautiful, expensive office and realized it had become a cage. He had spent his whole life building a fortress, but he had forgotten that a fortress is only as strong as the people inside. He had kicked out the only person who wasn't for sale, and now the bill for his pride was finally due. The night air was damp as Hanul pedaled her rusted bicycle away from the towering skyscraper. The box of cleaning supplies rattled in the front basket, a rhythmic sound that usually calmed her nerves. She was halfway to the bus stop, passing under a flickering streetlight, when a world behind her suddenly groaned. A deep, hollow boom echoed through the concrete canyons of the city, followed by the sharp tinkling of falling glass. Hanul squeezed the handbrakes, skidding to a halt. She turned her head, her eyes narrowing as she looked back at the penthouse. A plume of thick, dark smoke was beginning to curl out from the top floor, lit from beneath by an angry orange glow. Most people on the street started to run away or pull out their phones to film the fire, but Hanul simply watched. She knew that sound. It wasn't a gas leak or an accident. It was a breach charge. She stood there for a long moment, the cool wind tugging at her dark hair. She was free. She had her small envelope of cash, her safety, and her anonymity. Du Kyung had insulted her and thrown her out like yesterday's trash. He had even sent a man to end her life in the dark of the garage. By all logic, she should keep pedaling. She should board the bus and never look back at the man who thought her life was worth less than his scotch. But then, a memory surfaced through the static of her tactical mind. It had happened 4 months ago, on a Tuesday when the rain was pouring down in sheets. Hanul had received a frantic call from the hospital. Her father's heart was failing, and the bill for his emergency surgery was more than she could earn in a year. She had been standing in Du Kyung's office, her hands trembling as she polished a gold statue, tears she couldn't hide splashing onto the metal. Du Kyung had walked in, his face hard and impatient. He had asked why she was making a mess of his desk. When she had whispered the truth, she expected him to fire her on the spot for being a distraction. Instead, he had looked at her for a long, silent minute. He hadn't said a word of comfort, but the next morning, the hospital bill had been paid in full. There was no note, no thank you, and he never mentioned it again. He had treated it like a business transaction, but to Hanul, it was a debt of honor. In the world of the special forces, a debt of honor was more important than a paycheck. It was more important than a quiet life. One life for one life, she whispered to the empty street. Hanul didn't hesitate. She kicked the kickstand of her bike and let it fall to the sidewalk. She reached into her box of cleaning supplies, pulling out the heavy metal spray bottle she had used in the garage. She unscrewed the top, revealing a hidden compartment inside the plastic neck. From it, she pulled a small black tactical earpiece and a pair of thin carbon fiber gloves. She abandoned the box and the bicycle, turning back toward the burning tower. She didn't run like a panicked citizen. She moved with the low, fast glide of a predator returning to her territory. The people rushing past her saw a girl in a maid's uniform, but they didn't see the way her eyes were now mapping the entry points and calculating the wind speed. The police wouldn't arrive for at least 10 minutes, and the Black Tiger gang would be finished in 5. Du Kyung was a dead man walking, surrounded by traitors and assassins. He had fired his only shield, but the shield was coming back. Not because she liked him, and not because she wanted her job back, but because a ghost never leaves a debt unpaid. As she reached the side entrance of the building, Hanul pulled a small electronic bypass key from the hem of her apron. The red light on the card reader flickered to green. She stepped inside, the shadows of the lobby swallowing her whole. The cleaning lady was gone. The soldier had arrived. The lobby was filled with the smell of smoke and the sound of distant alarms. Hanul moved through the shadows of the entrance like a ghost returning to a haunted house. 3 black tiger guards stood near the main elevators, their rifles held high. They were looking for police in blue uniforms or soldiers in tactical gear. They didn't even glance at the young woman in the black and white maid's dress walking toward them with a bucket and a mop. "Hey, get out of here!" the nearest guard barked, stepping forward to shove her away. Hanul didn't say a word. As he reached out, she swung the heavy mop handle with a snap of her wrists. The thick wood cracked against the side of his helmet, sending him crashing into a marble pillar. Before the other 2 could react, she reached into her bucket and pulled out a pressurized bottle of industrial floor wax. She sprayed a thick, oily mist directly into their face shields, blinding them instantly. As they struggled to see, she used the wet mop to sweep their legs out from under them. They hit the floor with a heavy thud. Before they could breathe, Hanul used a set of heavy-duty plastic zip ties from her apron to bind their hands and feet. She did it with the same calm focus she used when she was bundling old newspapers for the trash. She stepped into the service elevator and punched the button for the penthouse. The music playing in the elevator was soft and cheerful, a strange contrast to the violence downstairs. Hanul reached into her cleaning kit and pulled out a long, thin canister of high-strength oven cleaner. She also grabbed a spray bottle filled with a mixture of vinegar and pepper she had made herself for tough stains. These weren't toys. In the hands of a Special Forces veteran, they were weapons. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor. A guard was waiting there, his back turned as he talked into a radio. Hanul didn't hesitate. She sprayed a cloud of the stinging pepper mix into the air. As the guard began to cough and claw at his eyes, she stepped behind him and delivered a precise strike to the back of his neck with a heavy metal flashlight. He slumped to the carpet without making a sound. She moved down the hallway, her sensible shoes making no noise on the plush rug. She passed the broken bodies of Du Kyung's elite guards, men who had been paid millions to protect him, but had failed because they were lazy. Hanul felt no pity for them. She only felt the weight of her debt. Near the office doors, 2 more hitmen were trying to set a small explosive charge. Hanul didn't wait for them to finish. She rolled a heavy, gallon-sized bottle of liquid bleach across the floor toward them. As they looked down in confusion, she threw a small, lit lighter she had taken from the lobby lounge. The chemical reaction caused a sudden, blinding flash of light and a hiss of toxic steam. The hitmen crumbled, clutching their throats and gasping for air. Hanul stepped through the white mist, her face calm and her eyes cold. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was the one cleaning the house, and she was starting with the trash. She reached the heavy oak doors of the office and paused, hearing the muffled voices inside. The real battle was about to begin. Inside the smoke-filled office, the air was thick and tasted like burnt plastic. Baek Du-kyung was on his knees, the cold barrel of a rifle pressed against the back of his neck. He looked up, his vision blurry from the flashbang grenade, and saw a pair of expensive leather shoes standing in front of him. He knew those shoes. He had bought them as a birthday gift for his younger brother, Do-hyun, only last month. Why? Do-kyung rasped, his voice breaking. I gave you everything. I built this empire for us. Do-hyun laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He looked down at his older brother with eyes full of hate. He wasn't a shy, quiet younger brother Do-kyung thought he knew. He was holding a gold-plated handgun, the same one Do-kyung had kept in his desk drawer for emergencies. You built an empire for yourself, Do-hyun snapped, stepping closer. You treated me like a child. You kept me in the shadows while you played the king. The Black Tigers offer me a real seat at the table. All I had to do was give them the codes and get rid of the only person who actually paid attention to the security. Do-kyung felt a sharp sting of regret. He realized now that his brother wasn't just talking about the guards. He was talking about the maid. Do-hyun had been the one to suggest firing Hanul. He had known that her sharp eyes were the only things standing in the way of his plan. The syndicate is rotting from the inside, brother, Do-hyun continued, gesturing to the masked hitmen standing around the room. The board of directors, the police captains, even your favorite captains, They all signed the papers this morning. They were tired of your rules. They wanted more money, more power, and fewer questions. You were the only one left who still believed in loyalty. Du Kyung looked around the room. The men he had grown up with, the men he had protected, were all gone or standing on the other side of the room. He had been so focused on his enemies outside that he never noticed the knives being sharpened in his own home. He felt a deep, crushing weight in his chest. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization that his entire life had been a lie. Enough talking, the leader of the Black Tigers growled, stepping forward. The police will be here in 5 minutes. Finish it so we can leave. Du Hyun nodded, his face turning cold. He raised the gold-plated pistol and aimed it right between Du Kyung's eyes. Goodbye, big brother. Don't worry. I'll take good care of your chair. Du Kyung closed his eyes, waiting for the end. He thought about the maid he had treated so poorly, the girl who had worked so hard for so little. He wondered if she was already safe in her tiny apartment, far away from the fire and the betrayal. He hoped she was. At least one person in his life deserved to be free. But then, the lights in the office suddenly flickered and died, plunging the room into a deep, terrifying darkness. The office was pitch black. The hum of the air conditioner died, replaced by the heavy, frightened breathing of the men in the room. Panic spread faster than the smoke. The backup generator. Du Hyun shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Check the panel. Now! One of the Black Tiger hitmen turned on a high-powered weapon light, the beam cutting through the haze like a sword. He swept it across the room, but he didn't find a girl in a maid's dress. He found only empty chairs and shadows. Suddenly, a soft clink echoed from the ceiling. Before the hitman could look up, a heavy cleaning chain dropped from the dark, wrapping around his throat and pulling him upward into the vents. He vanished without a single cry, leaving only his dropped flashlight spinning on the floor. Who's there? Another killer yelled, firing his rifle blindly into the corner. The muzzle flashes lit up the room for a split second, showing a glimpse of a black and white uniform moving with impossible speed. Han-ul didn't need a gun to terrify them. She used the room she had cleaned every day for 6 months. She knew exactly which floorboards creaked and which shadows were deep enough to hide a human body. She moved like a ghost, appearing behind a second guard and driving a heavy industrial stapler into his temple. He slumped to the ground, and before his partner could turn around, Han-ul sprayed a thick cloud of fire extinguisher foam into his face. While he clawed at his eyes, she tripped him with her mop handle and bound his wrists with a heavy-duty extension cord. It's just a girl, the leader of the Black Tigers roared, his pride turning into pure terror. She's just a maid. Kill her. But Han-ul was no longer a maid. She was a shadow that had lived in their blind spots for months. She threw a handful of heavy glass marbles, the ones she had collected from the broken vase in the lobby, across the hardwood floor. As the remaining hitmen scrambled and slipped, she picked them off one by one. She used their own momentum against them, using quick, surgical strikes to their joints and pressure points. One by one, the hardened killers fell. They were used to fighting people who shouted and bled. They didn't know how to fight someone who made no noise and felt no hesitation. The darkness was her ally, and the office was her cage. Du Kyung stayed on his knees, his eyes wide as he watched the carnage. He couldn't see Han-ul, but he could hear the efficiency of her movements. It was the sound of a master at work. He heard the thud of bodies hitting the floor and the clatter of dropped weapons. He heard the gasps of men who realized they were the ones being cleaned. Finally, the only person left standing was Du Hyun. He stood in the center of the room, waving his gold-plated pistol at the shadows, his face pale and dripping with sweat. Come out, he screamed. I'll kill you. I'll kill both of you. A soft footstep sounded behind him. Du Hyun spun around, but he was too slow. A hand reached out of the darkness, grabbing his wrist and twisting it until the gold gun fell to the floor. A cold, calm voice whispered in his ear. The house is clean now. The warehouse felt like the inside of a furnace. Orange flames licked the peeling paint on the walls, and thick, black smoke curled toward the ceiling like reaching fingers. In the center of the chaos, Han-ul stood perfectly still. He He didn't look like the quiet office assistant who fetched coffee and organized spreadsheets anymore. He looked like a storm that had finally broken loose. Around him lay the broken remains of the hit squad. These were men trained to kill, yet they hadn't stood a chance. Du-kyung leaned against a heavy metal crate, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood trickled down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he couldn't look away. He watched as Han-ul slowly wiped a crimson smear from his cheek with the back of his hand. The movement was calm, almost bored. "Who, what are you?" Du-kyung managed to choke out. His voice was thin and trembled with a fear he had never felt before. Han-ul turned his head. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, making them look like glowing coals. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward Du-kyung. Each footstep echoed against the concrete floor, sounding like a death knell. Du-kyung tried to stand, but his legs felt like lead. He realized then that the power dynamic had shifted forever. He wasn't the boss here. He was barely a victim. As Han-ul stopped just a few feet away, the heat from the fire grew intense. A wooden beam overhead snapped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Han-ul looked down at Du-kyung, and for the first time, the king of the corporate world saw the truth. He saw the cold, calculated precision of a man who ruled a much darker kingdom. "You spent so much time trying to crush me," Han-ul said, his voice low and steady. "You thought I was a bug under your shoe, but you never noticed that I was the one holding the floor up." The realization hit Du-kyung like a physical blow. The way certain rivals had disappeared, the way the Mafia threats had suddenly vanished whenever Han-ul was around. It wasn't luck. It was protection. He had been bullying a dragon, thinking it was a lizard. Overwhelmed by the sheer weight of Han-ul's presence, Du-kyung's knees finally gave out. He sank to the floor, his expensive suit gathering dust and ash. He was the king of the office, but here in the fire and blood, he was nothing. He stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, looking up at the man he had once mocked. Han-ul didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply looked down at the kneeling king and adjusted his sleeves, ready to finish what the fire had started. The fire in the warehouse eventually died down, leaving nothing but gray ash and the smell of burnt metal. Du-kyung remained on his knees, his expensive suit ruined and his pride completely shattered. He looked up at Han-ul, waiting for the killing blow or for the sound of police sirens. But the sirens never came. The silence of the night was only broken by the cracking of cooling wood. Han-ul reached in her jacket and pulled out a thin, black folder. She didn't look like a victim, and she certainly didn't look like a regular employee anymore. She looked like the person who owned the room. She tossed the folder onto the dusty floor in front of Du-kyung. "The police won't be coming," Han-ul said. Her voice was cold and hit like a block of ice. "If they show up, they find your fingerprints on the illegal ledgers and your name on the syndicate's payroll. You go to jail for life. Your company vanishes. Your family loses everything." Du-kyung trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were photos, bank statements, and names of people he thought were his secret allies. Han-ul had been collecting this evidence for months, right under his nose while she was filing his papers and getting his tea. She hadn't just been working for him. She had been dissecting his entire life. "What do you want?" Du-kyung whispered. He was a broken man, and they both knew it. "I'm not going back to my old desk," Han-ul replied, stepping closer so her shadow fell over him. "And I'm not turning you in. Not yet. From now on, you're the face of the company, but I am the hand that moves it. The syndicate that tried to kill us tonight, we're going to tear them down. Every crooked manager, every dirty investor, and every hidden boss. I will be your enforcer. I will clean up your mess from the inside out." Du-kyung looked at the shadow contract in the folder. It wasn't a legal document, but it was a death warrant if he broke it. He realized that the Korean Mafia boss rumors weren't just stories. Han-ul had the power to protect him or destroy him with a single phone call. He reached out a shaky hand and picked up a piece of charred charcoal from the floor. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. He was no longer the king. He was now a puppet. Han-ul turned and walked toward the exit, her long coat fluttering in the wind. She didn't look back. She had a list of names, and the real war was just beginning. The office assistant was gone. The enforcer had arrived.